Okay, thanks, Alice.
Yep.
Next slide.
Yep.
So stay close is a big deal. Three criteria to use for how close to be. First of all, the boats you're looking at should occupy your entire visual field, as if you had sort of a TV screen in front of you. They should fill that screen. And the second thing is that I'm sorry, I lost it. That when you're looking across boats, as I said before, you got to be able to tell how far apart they are. So that's, and you need to be close enough to the boats you're covering so the other umpire is clear about which boats you're covering. And also, definitely, you got to be close enough to the race you're covering so umpires in other races know which race you're covering. And if you think that's extraordinary, it's not. I've certainly been in a situation where I could not determine which race umpires were umpiring. So get closer. So the real key here for me, and it's emphasized in the umpire manual, is you should operate at dinghy speed. And what Chris Atkins authored the umpire manual suggests, and I religiously follow, is I get alongside, say you're beating to windward in the first leg. I get alongside a boat, so I'm looking across his transom, and I move my throttle until I'm exactly matching his speed. And now I take my hand off the throttle, and I don't put my hand on that throttle again until we're up at the first windward mark, unless the wind changes. Get your hand off the throttle and on the steering wheel, and you could just operate as if you were a dinghy, operate at dinghy speeds. Always know where your wake is. The worst thing that we do is to go across. Alice pointed out, I think it was Alice pointed out that the other day to me that sometimes being on a full plane is better than being at half. The worst thing to be is the speed just before you plane, right? Because you're just digging a hole in the water, putting all that water aside, and then you're just causing everybody a huge problem. The other thing to worry about in your wake is your turbulence from your prop. If boats, especially boats beating to windward, they need their foils for lift. And if they're sailing through your turbulence, those foils just simply disappear. It's as if they pull their centerboard up. They have no value whatsoever in turbulent water. You don't, unless there's adhered flow, foil doesn't function. So it's just stalls. So please be sure that you don't turn in front of a boat that's beating to windward and then motor along so he has to run up in your wake. If you turn to like beating to windward angle, and then a boat tacks into that, well, that's on him. But but pay attention to that. Anticipate where you need to be and get there earlier, and instead of trying to go faster. That's critical. That's key. I cross inside the fleet all the time, and I encourage you to do so. And the sailors are used to it. Their coaches do it all the time. So don't worry about it. Just cross. And if you got to, suppose you realize, oh, I want to go over there, but there's this boat in my way, and I got it, so I've got to go behind her. When you do that, go right behind her, just the way you would if you were sailing a dinghy and ducking. So you would want to sail a foot or so behind that boat, not a boat length or so, or 2 boat lengths. It's a natural tendency to get a long way behind that boat, but every bit of distance you go back is distance you got to make back up forward, and that's hard to do. To judge whether you can cross a boat or not, just pretend you're sailing a dinghy. Since you're going at dinghy speed, just look and say, if I were beating to windward here in a dinghy, would I cross that guy handily, like with 1 or 2 boat lengths in front? And if the answer is yes, go ahead and cross. You're only going at dinghy speed, it's not much wake, and you'll be in great shape. Next slide. As I mentioned, I take my hand off the throttle. The top umpires that I umpire with do this routinely. They just simply don't touch the throttle. So, well, what do you do when you're about to run into a boat? And the answer is you steer. So a boat, you're sailing along, you're to windward of a boat, you don't think he's going to tack, and then he suddenly tacks into you. What do you do? And the answer is you make a sharp turn to go down his leeward side and around his stern. You don't stop, because if you stop, now you're in his way. And not only that, but you stopped umpiring entirely. So definitely try to steer your way out of trouble instead of throttling your way out of trouble. If you get behind on a beat, if you turn directly into the wind, you increase your speed by 40%. So if all the boats are going at 3 knots, right, you're going over 4 knots to windward. And that makes you catch up really, really fast, a huge distance, and you're not putting up any more weight because you didn't actually touch the throttle. If you want to go back, like you feel like you're up too far, simply go across the course. The boats are still proceeding to windward, and so you've essentially stopped in your windward progress, and they're still going, so they easily catch up to you. Always push forward. Oh, avoid being close alongside. That's the issue. There is visibility. If you're close alongside a boat and you need to look at boats that are farther away, like in the middle of the course, you can't see them because of the sail plan of the boat that's right alongside. So be aware of that. And directly astern is just the worst place to be. You can't see anything. You can't tell how that boat is doing relative to other boats, and you can't tell anything about the gap. So move up into the perspective gap instead. So off the quarter of a boat is perfect, but dead astern of her is not good. This is particularly true, by the way, if you're ever doing match race umpiring. Getting directly behind one of the boats is just deadly. Push forward. Always remember to push forward. Anything you do that slows you down is going to have to be made up. And the vast majority of all of the umpire positioning errors I see are boats that fail to push forward. Should always be in your mind. On the run, question is, what do you do about prospective luffs? You're going along at the speed the boats are going, and there's boats right here, in front, say slightly in front of you, and off to the side, and all of a sudden, the leeward boat luffs and rounds that boat right up, and he's right in your face. How do you avoid that? You don't know when it's going to happen, and the luffing boat is trying to catch the other boat by surprise, so nobody knows when it's going to happen. And how do you avoid it? And the answer is push forward, watch those 2 boats from in front of them instead of behind them. And now when they luff up, you just nip right around behind them, steering, not throttle, and you'll be right on their tails, going at any speed, watching the action. That's in that, by the way, that's all this, everything in here is in the umpire manual. Don't stop to give penalties. It's really natural when you're about to give a penalty to go up directly behind the boat you're about to penalize, and you fly your red flag and you blow your whistle and you feel really proud of yourself for getting the call right, and then he turns right in front of you. And you stop and back up or try to get out of the way or turn sideways or whatever. Just don't do that. Before you blow the whistle and fly the red flag, make sure that he's not in your natural course, and that therefore when he starts to spin, that you can just proceed on with the race. After you give a penalty, keep umpiring. Go forward, press forward. The second umpire in your boat can keep track of turns. How do you know if a boat has completed her turns without actually staring at her and watching her do the turns? Anybody know what the key is? How do you know she didn't forget a tack or a jibe?
What tack did she start on?
Right. She has to come out of her turns on the same tack she started on. It doesn't hurt to say to the other umpire, okay, we penalize the boat, she started on starboard tack. And that way, it's easy to tell the difference between one turn and 2. They take two totally different amounts of time. But the trouble is, did they do all their tacks and jibes? And the answer is just check that they came out on the same tack they went in. When you have to get somewhere, and then we'll see later in the boat on the left going upwind, the umpire boat is supposed to get over the top of the first mark when the boats arrive there. And the question is, how does she do that when she's been hanging sort of behind the boats she's covering? And the answer is, if you just throttle a tad faster and go directly upwind whenever you can, you will get to that mark in time. You do not have to race around on a plane. And also don't underestimate the time it takes for the boats to get to that mark. You see them moving, you can sort of have a feel for that. And if you're going at 2/10 of a mark or half a knot faster than any of the other boats, you'll get to that mark in plenty of time. Okay, next. So there are a number of different umpiring options, and when we started out years ago umpiring, the assumption was it was going to be full umpiring. We would have 3 umpire boats on every race, and each of the umpire boats we picked a team, say blue, and then each of the umpires would follow one of the blue boats, and we just track them around the course. And we were like, oh, no more than a boat length behind them the whole way. We just filtered in between each other, and we signaled to the other umpire to go through if they had a tough situation, and so on. And that was pretty great umpiring. I think it was good coverage. It's still believed to be basically the best way to umpire, but there's no way we can get 6 umpires for every race when we want 3 races at a time on the race course, and there's no way we can staff regattas that way. So as a practical matter, reality is we have 2 umpires in a boat, and each of them has 2 umpires. And from now on, for the rest of this little section, I'm going to assume we only have 2 umpire boats. And there is an option with 2 umpire boats that there might be a floater. That is, you could have 1 umpire boat on each race, and then 1 or more boats that are designated to be floaters. They just show up at the right place. And the right place is Mark 1 and Mark 3. And at Mark 1, the floater comes in on the right side and picks up the rightmost pair. The boat that was covering the right on the windward leg moves over toward the left, and the boat across the top that was supposed to go up the top and cover the top of the mark does his normal job. And at Mark 3, the floater hangs out on the right looking downwind. And that enables them to call the zone for boats that are coming straight downwind or coming in on port tack, and announce the zone to everybody else, and enables them to handle the boats that go into those luffs and mark traps just before the zone.
Rob, I'm assuming that all of these presume a digital end as the course.
All of these presume digital end as the course. It's the only course that's sailed in college and high school.
Thank you.
Right. There's a definite possibility that you will only have 1 umpire boat and there aren't any floaters. If that's the case, if you find yourself in a situation where there's only 1 umpire boat on a race, I strongly suggest you go up the left side of the course. Right? That enables you to get around and in a good spot to watch Mark 1 and see the gaps between boats that are coming in on starboard tack without getting caught so totally behind the fleet that you're out of the action for any of the boats on the left. It also enables you to see hails for room to tack. As Sandy and Alice and I discovered quite recently, you can't easily see rooms for hail attack from down inside the fleet, and it's much easier to be on the left side. When you get to, and then you go above leg 2, you pretend to be the left-hand umpire. In other words, you behave very much like the left-hand umpire. At Mark 3, there's 2, you just have to figure out where you think the pressure point's going to be, and you follow it. Mark 3, right? And again, at Mark 4, as they start the windward leg, you just have to figure out where you think the action's going to be, and you have to sort of compromise, but do it. Get close enough to see that. Obviously, use a floater if you can, and going up the middle of the beat is better than getting off to the side, because that way you can handle things on both sides. Next slide. In case you do get into a situation where there's 3 umpire boats, the way that's done is that the umpire team, well, in any case, whether it's 3 umpires or 2 umpires, the umpire team follows the sail the sail cover that color that has the lowest numbers in the fleet. So if 7, 8, 9 is racing against 13, 14, 15, then we follow 7, 8, 9. The only exception to that is if you do get into a situation where you have the same team repeatedly, you might want to switch teams that you're covering just for equity. But that doesn't happen when we do round robins, which is all we do in college and high school. So in 3 umpires, they got to figure out who's going to watch whom. And the easy way to do it is you got 13, 14, 15 are out there that we're going to follow. And ump 1, we've designated one person as ump 1, the other next boat is ump 2, and the next boat is ump 3, and we just pick the corresponding boats. But not everybody likes that, and it means chasing boats around in the pre-start, which is kind of annoying. So another way to do it is to just pick them up at the start. The 3 umpires start out left, middle, and right at the starting line, and the left-hand umpire picks up the left-handmost boat, middle picks up middle, and right picks up right. In all of this situation, both 2 and 3 umpires on a race, the standard is that the driver of your boat follows the boat that you're supposed to be following, or the fleet that you're supposed to be following. And the other umpire follows and calls all the rest of the boats. In 3-boat umpiring, there's a problem, obviously, when your boat takes off into the middle of the fleet and there's crossings that you can't handle, and going through there would be a mess. You got to be able to switch with the other umpire. And I'm not sure my camera is working, but I'm going to try it. And so the signal for that is to hold your hands up like this. So for the non-driving umpire, to hold the hands up like this, crossed arms, so, and make sure the other umpire sees it. That means let's switch. And it marks 1 and 4, the assignments when you're doing 3 umpire boats. You reassign. The boat over the top at mark 1 takes the lead. The boat that's on the left of the 2 remaining boats takes the next boat in your fleet, and the boat that stayed underneath takes the trailing boat. And the same thing at mark 4, the boat that led to the mark automatically goes to the right and takes the boats to the right, and the other 2 boats take any boats that go left. Let's talk about where you should be when you're on a pair. As I said before, your pair should almost fill your field of vision, and you can see here the place to be. You want to be between boats, obviously looking at the gap. Next. If you're following the yellow boat, here's where the 3 umpires would expect to find themselves. Here's a neat little picture of the whole race course. You can see them in the pre-start where left and right are. And then at the start, then up. I find look at the middle of the first windward leg. I find that position for L to be difficult. This diagram is drawn by Chris Atkins. He says he goes up through that gap all the time. I'm always afraid they're going to attack back, and I'm going to find myself directly in front of an opti. So I much prefer to go around the outside of that pair. At the top, you'll notice that the left-hand boat goes up. The other boat goes underneath. More or less dead to leeward of the mark. And that just naturally follows as the top umpire takes the lead. The other umpire has the back of the fleet. And that immediately translates into forward and back on the next run. Notice that the left-hand umpire is forward and the right-hand umpire is back. Alternative position on the run for B is right where that number 6 is. That's a spot I really love. I get to see all the action, and I get to follow pairs whichever way they go. And I'm not in danger of getting anybody's way. So that's a good spot on the run if the fleet is fairly well together, fairly close together. There they are. You see the boat on the left going through the reach. And Chris has him turning left. All of our diagrams, which were written by Peter Wilson, will have them going right, turning right. Tells you about a difference in opinion about. I was taking my international umpire exam from Chris Atkins, and I turned right at the bottom there. And he said, well, you're supposed to go left. And I said, no, Chris, you're just wrong. But he passed me anyway. On the next leg, you could see that the boat that leads to the mark, it was the boat that was previously went through the reach. He stays with the front of the fleet, and he leads the fleet around the mark. One of the faults we see most commonly is that boat stops and does not lead the fleet around the mark and ends up stuck and unable to go in and cover the boats on the next leg. And finally, just cover left and right as you go up the beat. And it's really nice if you can get an umpire boat over the top. The problem is the only way for that boat F to get over the top was to go around the race committee boat. In college racing and in high school racing, that committee boat is commonly a very low boat, like a whaler or something like that. Very easy to go around and still see the entire race over the top. If the finished boat is some guy's big yacht, then it's just not a tolerable technique because it puts you out of view for a while. Next slide. Okay, you know, right, that if it's play 2 and we've got one team has a 2-3-4, the 1 has to come back on the 2 at some point. Otherwise, she risks losing the race. So obviously, that's a pressure point. Obviously, the 5 and 6 are going to try to pass the 2-3-4, and you got to watch to see if they do get some leverage and they do get faster and they get up there, that's where the next pressure points are going to be. And similar for every combination, you know where the pressure points have got to be. And that's the only thing you have to watch. You don't have to watch that boat in first place who's 3 boat lengths ahead of everybody. Like on a 1-2. Where's the pressure point with a 1-2? Where's the key pressure point? Somebody?
Between 2 and 3?
No. It's between the ace in the hole and the boat behind him. In other words, it's the third boat in the 1-2-3, the 1-2.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Who's playing back against the other team.
I was assuming a 1-2-6. And you didn't say that.
Right. No, say a 1-2-4 or something like that. You got to look at the 4-5. Which is counterintuitive. You kind of want to watch behind the 2 because you figure that's where everything is. But one boat does watch there between 2 and 3, and the other boat watches behind the remaining winning boat. Stay on the same ladder rung. You guys all know where the ladder rungs are. If you find yourself behind the ladder rungs, I don't mind if you're 1 rung behind. What bothers me is when you're 2 or 3 rungs behind because you're not up with the fleet. You want to be clear on which boat is covering which boat. That, in my mind, is a place for the radio. Sandy is not as radioactive as I am. I think Alice is. You have a radio, no harm in getting on and saying, I got boat 15. I got the 15-3 pair. Whatever. Just so everybody knows that you're handling it. It's quite common that you really clearly are handling one pair. The other umpire boat is clearly handling another pair. And the third pair is being shared. And in that case, it's good to slide over toward that. If you're going to take that other pair, slide over toward it so that it's clear to the other umpire you got it. Or maybe get on the radio, or maybe you're both going to look at whatever they do, in which case you've got to be really sure before you make a call that everybody agrees. I use the radio constantly, nonstop. I have it right up here by my chin. I could just reach up and trigger it. I think, John, I think you use a remote mic. A lot of umpires do. some way to quickly use the radio and get on it and immediately tell people what you're going. You do not have to use full VHF protocol of identifying who you're calling and identify who you are and so on. Just say into the radio what you want heard. Remember, if you operate a radio, to press the button well before you begin to speak. There's a lag in the electronics that cuts off the first word. And that's one reason why we try to avoid things like no overlap or no luffing rights. If that cuts off, if the word no is cut off, you just told the other umpires that the lure boat has luffing rights. That's why we try to use something like negative or boat so-and-so cannot luff. So you see here, where is the action going to be? Well, if the 5-6 can catch up to the 4, that's going to be a problem. And the 1 almost certainly is going to come back on the 2 at Mark 4. Look for a jibe. Next. So since there's only 2 umpire boats and we're doing zone coverage, why worry about what fleet we're covering? And the answer is to figure out who's looking at which boats. So if we're covering blue, then I know that I'm only responsible for blue boats. And if I got 2 blue boats over on my side and there's only 1 boat over on the other side, both I and the other umpire know, or we and the other umpire boat know which ones are covering. It's left and right on the beats, and it's forward and back on the reaches and runs. Stay in your zone. I was at an event not too long ago when the other umpire just crossed like right in front of me, and I'm thinking, what do I do now? So at least stay on the correct side of the other umpire so you know. Stay close enough so you know. I've mentioned that several times. Okay, when you got two umpires in your boat and you got 2 pairs to watch, and they're not both directly in your field of view, it's reasonable to say, for the driver to say to the other umpire, you watch those guys to starboard, I'll watch the guys right in front. Or something like that. I mentioned last night, I continue to do umpire speak with the pair that I've picked, even though I no longer have an umpire on me right now. And I continue to call the same boat, but I do it silently. You should keep in constant communication about who's watching what. And I'll have my fellow umpire will say something like, okay, those guys split, I'm back to watching the pair in front. Because I can't necessarily see him. He might be standing behind or to the side of me where I can't tell. And when boats are converging or diverging, maintain the dialogue, and it might have to do with all the boats. So you got to judge who's going to, where's the next incident going to come from, and that's obviously got to get your priority. And that means you're going to miss calls, but we do the best we can. Next slide. Here's just a diagram of exactly what we just said. On that purple boat, I would expect the driver to say, I've got these boats. I've got he'd indicate the boats on the left by number. So if assuming the boat number 3 is blue on the left, he'd say, I've got boat 3 and you take boat 4. I'm sorry, 2, which is on his right. Okay, next. You see where I've got that left-hand umpire. I'm assuming we're about halfway up the beat or 2/3 of the way up the beat. It's a good place for him to be. He sees that gap, right? But he doesn't have to worry about getting anybody's way, and he'll make it to the first mark at dinghy speed before any other boats will. Because he's a rung up, you can tell, right? If you're a rung up and you're at dinghy speed and you're going at dinghy angles, then you're going to get to the first mark before they do. You don't have to think too much about this. Next. So in the pre-start, you see where that green umpire is? Early in the pre-start, I like to be even out to the right of that, even out beyond where the furthest blue boat is. Because if boats go out there and decide to mess around with each other, I'm right where I can watch. And then I follow them in. But as we'll go on, that left-hand umpire will slide down toward the pin. And the right umpire will follow the boats into the umpire boat. And the left umpire boat doesn't get down to the right by the pin until the actual go. Next. Boy, here we are with the umpire boat, the umpires I love, right there. This is exactly where you want to see umpires be. You don't want to see them hanging out 2 boat lengths below everybody. The purple umpire is not interfering with any umps. He gets to see both the pair in the middle, and he gets to see the pair directly in front of him. And he's ready to go onto the race course as soon as the go. And here we are. So let's say that the purple boat, let's say that I'm going to say the blue boat in the middle, let's say he's OCS. All right, he gets called. What should the red umpire boat do? I'm going to suggest 2 things. Slide to the right, and push forward. You want that blue boat to do his turn behind you. Not his turn, his return to the line. You want him to return to the line and end up behind you. Otherwise, you get stuck behind a boat that's in 6th place by a long margin, no possibility of getting any kind of rules trouble, and you're nowhere near the rest of the fleet. Or suppose you spin that boat. You just did an illegal, whatever, pump. Well, you know he's going to spin right there, so stay out of his way and push forward. Make sure he ends up behind you. Next. More often than not, there's 2 pairs on the right and 1 pair on the left. The yellow boat on the left is trying to pin the blue boat out so she can't tack to go to the first mark. And the blue boat, of course, is going to try to inch her way up and out, leave out the yellow boat, and hopefully be able to tack in front of her. Whereas on the rest of the boats are more engaged in more common sorts of stuff on the race. Of course, so we'd expect the right-hand boat. This is why when we have 2 umpires, and if we don't have enough umps, we frequently get 2 umpires in one boat and 1 umpire in the other boat. And the single-handed umpire, I'd like to be in the purple boat here because she's more likely to get only 1 pair to look at instead of 2. And as I said, the manual that Chris wrote says that ump can go up between those 2 boats and the windward mark. But I just don't know what she does when they tack. So I just can go around. This is the classic position we want. And, I think we talked about Alice and Sandy and I talked about this a little bit, and maybe we would suggest maybe that red umpire boat should slide over to the left a little. Because the umpire boat that went over the top gave up coverage of his boats.
Yeah, Rob, just interrupting briefly, I like if on the right-hand boat, especially if the right-hand pair is going to get to the mark first, start favoring the left and make it easier for the left-hand umpire to get over on top. So they're not saying, oh, I have to stay with this pair. Start sliding over last third of the beat underneath so that you got the boats behind and make it easier for the purple boat to get up on top.
So I think this is an improvement on the umpire manual. I think you're absolutely right, Sandy. I've never thought about it much before. And the manual has this umpire boat actually directly to leeward of the mark, which is fine. But we're suggesting maybe even earlier, she should have been a little further left. Okay. Notice that the boat over the top, the umpire boat over the top, can see the gap between boats approaching the mark on starboard tack. Side to side gap. So the inability of that other umpire to judge that distance is not critical. You'd think, wait a minute, who's calling the zone on those starboard tackers coming in? And the answer is Nobody is doing it, and it never seems to cause a problem. The overlaps tend to be either really well and clearly established and advanced, in which case there's no question, or it's possible just to see from other places on the course what's happening. That amazed me when I first got into this situation with 2 umpire boats and said, wait a minute, who's going to be out there judging the starboard tack zone? And the answer is, well, you can't, with this system, you can't do that. And it doesn't seem to actually ever matter.
Rob, in my own novice way, when I was trying to do it, you're quite right that purple boat is in a good position to see the gap between the lateral gap between the boats right near the red boat, if the red boat's not there. I found, though, that it tended to suck me back because I stayed watching that gap as they came into the mark and didn't get far enough ahead.
Andrew, we'll go to the next slide.
Okay.
Because I think so here's what I want to see happen. I want to see that what boat that was on the right now is underneath. I want her to push up. And
Right.
She knows easily where she can be without interfering with boats, right? As long as she's below the line of all the boats in the fleet, she's safe. Nobody is going to bear off here and do anything weird. So what she wants to be is up there as close as she can, and now she takes over the responsibility. If those blue and yellow on the right coming to the mark were overlapped, she'd want to be those umpires would want to be standing up, looking over the top of the boat to see what that gap is. Okay. On leg 2, you're coming into that second mark. Notice how far forward that purple umpire boat is. This is actually what we want and what we rarely achieve. We want that umpire boat to be up there watching this across the stern of the lead boat, especially if, as in this case, there's a pressure point there. If it's a 1-2, then she would be across the stern of the boat second place. Notice that there's an area there where the umpire boat can't go, because following boats will maybe luff up into that, and she'll be finding herself directly in front of boats that are coming at her. So she's got to go out and around that triangle. Next. Boy, I think we just said that. Next. Notice how well situated the purple umpire is, as long as she continues to move forward. Hopefully she's not sitting there. If she's moving at dinghy speed, she's in a great spot to see anything that happens between the first couple boats and between that yellow boat and the oncoming blue boats. In this case, the red umpire is going to have to bear off slightly to get out of their way. Here's the problem, what I call a Christine Agitella problem, because she is the one who told me the solution. The trailing ump, here's a situation in which it's reasonable for blue to luff yellow out of the course to establish they're going for play 2, right? They're going to get a 1, 2, 3, or they're hoping to. And so we have to watch the luff between the 2 boats that are headed up. It's natural for pink here, purple, whatever, natural for that umpire boat to wait, to tarry, and watch that luff. But she can't afford to do it. She's got to press forward and lead it. And the other boat has to follow it. Suppose that you don't feel like you got the guts to go through there in green, which you might not. You could still see that luff pretty well from a distance. If green were to hover down along below the bubble that's coming out of her right now, she would then allow the other boats to pass in front of her, and she can still see the gap between the 2 luffing boats, which is the only critical feature here. But it's her responsibility, this point. And if she did do that, she would probably, as soon as those last two boats are past her, she'd want to take the stern of the boat in sixth place and get over to these two boats that were luffing. Next slide. Once again, try to figure out what's going to happen next and be ready for it. The coverage is front and back. That area that's shown there is the area that, oh, hey, my triangle moved. Anyway, that area, roughly speaking, is where boats will, setting a mark trap will luff up, and you just don't want to be there. There's two dangers of being in front of boats when they do something sudden like luffing. One of them, of course, is being in their way. But the other is that you stop umpiring. The driver is doing nothing but figuring out how to get out of the way of the boats that are coming at him, and that loses an umpire from the race. So that's a really negative result. Notice that the leftmost umpire here, the next slide shows it too. It's okay. Go to the next slide. The leftmost umpire goes through the reach. How do you do that? And the answer is if you get to the reach in your umpire boat at the same time that the first boat in the fleet reaches the mark, then you're in fine shape because she has to go around the mark and you don't. So when you just go straight, putt, 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 just dinghy speed, you're going to be well clear of her when she turns and comes at you. Even a little bit retarded from that. If you find yourself a little further behind, cross the reach farther from the mark. And that gives you that extra advantage. It gives you a chance to get across the reach before the other boat is around and you're interfering.
Yeah, Rob, one quick add. The other thing that often happens is if there's a launched one and you need to stay back and actually call the zone for the rest of the fleet, you end up crossing the leg after boat one has gone past.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, I had a floater in there. Back up a second, just so we can see where the floater. If we do a floater, we want to put the floater over where that's indicated, and that boat's stationary. It could be, I've thought maybe we should be using floaters more often, and you could tap on somebody who's waiting for the next start, and if there's a boat free that isn't umpiring, just say, hey, how about meeting us at Mark 3?
Rob, could you give us a quick discussion of why Ump2 wants to turn right instead of left?
Oh, just to watch the race, just to be able to see the race as the driver otherwise has the race behind his back.
Yeah.
Momentarily as he turns. And also I want to stay close to the race. I'd like to be underneath the mark as opposed to halfway down like 4.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, for me, it's sort of it depends. I'm much more likely to go to the right if I'm single-handing and I don't want to take my eyes off the match for even a split second. If it's really tight as you're going in there when you just don't do it. You all have to kind of switch over one shoulder and look the other shoulder if you turn left. So if the action's a little bit less tight, I'm more likely to turn left, and then you're just waiting for them to catch up to you. But if it's really tight, I'm more likely to go right.
If you do go right, you have to dig deep. Because you're about to circle right. You don't go right and then turn left to go back toward Mark 4. You continue your turn, right?
Right. And the turning radius of your powerboat.
So so you want to make sure that you're not in one of those flat Carolina skiffs, which when you try to turn it just goes sideways.
I asked because I actually ran into somebody on the bottom reach turning right. Actually, the first time I umpired with Sandy.
Yeah, so you be careful, but even digging down, when you dig down, you're talking about going down a couple dinghy lengths below the mark, so you're getting away from the fleet pretty much. But now you're turning right towards them, so you get to see them right in front of you, and now you get to go down the leg with them, close to leeward.
Roger.
the biggest fault here, there's two things I got to talk about here. One is sometimes that boat on the left can't get through the reach. She gets caught up to windward of it. Then if that happens, she really has no alternative. Don't stay up above the reach and umpire. She has to come around behind the fleet. The other umpire should catch onto that and immediately take her role to leeward and ahead. Because you do not want to get caught in that red triangle. Believe me.
You only get caught there once or twice and you learn.
In your life. Right. Okay. But wait a minute. But back up. It's really important for green to push forward here. All right. She's got to see what's going to happen. And probably where she is not a good spot. So I'd say she now adds that half a knot to her speed and just motors up to leeward of blue, so she can see, looking more or less directly to windward, what happens at the windward mark. I'd say she's probably not as far forward as she'd like to be. You see where we like her to be, the purple boat. That's a good spot to be to watch everything. The red boat has to be careful not to go into that red triangle right when there's a boat coming back on starboard tack. This is a standard play, by the way, for those of you who are not familiar with it. It's a compression. What yellow wants to do here is to force the leading blue boat, the leeward blue boat there, either to go up or to jibe. Either way, that puts her under yellow's control because yellow has mark room. So then yellow can simply jibe and go to the mark and on close haul course, and blue is just stuck. Has to go behind, and that'll compress the blue fleet, which is the only thing she can hope to accomplish here. It's very rare for the trailing boat here to round the mark. She should think her goal here is to cut short of the mark and to pick up the boats that go left. Otherwise, she gets too far behind. Next. There's a reason why we wanted that purple boat to press forward at Mark 4. We want her to be in front of the boats if possible, or if not in front, at least even with the first boat. Once again, if there's a gap, she might go through the gap. But she has to get to the middle of the fleet to see what's going on. She can't lie just to the starboard side of that blue boat, because that blue boat could very well be going to the corner. And now she's stuck. We're down to basically got a one umpire boat race. At the finish, you're going to have one boat taking two pairs, and frequently they pair up. And you want to do that coverage, its own coverage again. And once again, we wouldn't mind if purple was up above the committee boat, looking back instead of either of them, actually. Next. Okay, that's the summary. So what happens when you miss an incident altogether? No, let me be even stronger than that. What happens if you didn't see the lead in to the incident? You shouldn't, when you hear a hail, look back and say, oh my God, that boat's on port, the other boat's on starboard, this must be a port starboard, I'm going to penalize the boat on port tack. Because you have no clue what happened beforehand. Don't do that. Don't guess. When the pairs are wide apart, you just have to try to decide. It's very common that one of the pairs, at least on the tack they're already on, can't really engage with each other. Like the windward boat is windward and ahead of the other boat. She's covering. And as long as that relationship stays, you don't have to worry about any rules issues. Whereas maybe the boats in the middle are right side by side, and maybe the leeward boats bow out, and therefore there's a good chance that there's going to be some action between the two. So look to see which boats can physically reach the other boat, and go with the ones that can. It used to be we changed positions all the time just to get our heads clear and so on, and we're now sort of thinking it's the other way around. If you say I'm going to take left at the beginning of the day, you should take left a lot, because that's how you learn and where to be and how to get better. And vice versa. Saying now in the middle of the day, you might switch and go right, or you might end up paired with a different umpire boat and say, this time let's go right. And I mentioned what happens if we do have single-handed umpiring boats. Oh, none of you who is beginning is going to end up in one, but I end up in one all the time because I volunteer for it. That way no one can hear me make mistakes. And they should go that I volunteer to go left. And then be in the front. I'm lighter, and that means my plane, if I do have to plane, my wake is going to be smaller. And secondly, I'm less likely to have multiple pairs. It's the umpire boat that's on the right on the beat, and the trailing umpire for the reach and the run, who is most likely to get multiple boat scenarios with more than one boat from the same fleet near each other. The front of the fleet tends to be pretty devoid of that. You'll have one boat set a mark trap, pretty easy to see what he's doing with respect to everybody else. But at the back of the fleet, it's much more complicated. Next.
Over to you, Sandy.
All right, I have to unmute myself by not through the space bar. All right. Moving on to protests and procedures, and I'm gonna, as Alice gets a slide set up, I'm gonna point out a couple of things. One, we're going to be focusing here on team race protests and college sailing. So there are going to be some differences in what you're going to hear me say that are unique to college sailing. The other thing is we are not going to spend a lot of time talking about post-race hearings. The general thinking is that we're trying to train new umpires up into becoming effective. And at an event, if there's stuff happening ashore, redresses and other things, almost every umpire team will have a fairly experienced umpire and or judge that will take the lead on that stuff. So in the 5 hours of stuff we wanted you guys to absorb for this seminar, we didn't want you worrying about hearings a lot. So you'll see that stuff covered very briefly. All right. So the protest, and when we say protest, this includes the on-water stuff. So it's protests really are divided into two stuff. There's the stuff that happens during the race, and there's the stuff that happens after the race. During the race, it's divvied up between what the boats initiate between themselves and what the umpires initiate. So 90% of it we leave to the boat initiated. We let them sort it out. And that's the part 2 rules, touching a mark, and rule 42. It's pretty rare for the sailors to protest each other for 42, but they can. They are allowed to. And if in response to that protest, a boat does a 1-turn penalty, then we umpires stay out of it, just like we always do. So, or almost always. So at boat initiated stuff, if one boat spins, we generally get out of it. And I'll go to some exceptions on it otherwise. Umpire initiated, there's a few things that are specifically umpire initiated. And in this little list, bullet list, the asterisk means touching a mark, and the asterisk means and no penalty taken. So if boat touches a mark, it doesn't take a penalty, we get involved. If there's kinetics and no boat takes a penalty, we get involved. Sportsmanship, not sure why that has an asterisk. That shouldn't have an asterisk. Advantage despite taking a penalty, we get involved. Damage and injury, we get involved. And what was the last one? Teammate contact. If they don't sort it out themselves, we sort it out. So now we can go to the next slide. All right, the procedural steps. This is something I hope most everybody already knows. Boat hails by yelling protests, and no matter how much we encourage them at every umpire, every competitors meeting to say it loudly, they quite often don't say it very loudly. It does have to have the word protest in it. Yelling umpire doesn't count. Used to a few years ago when you had the 2-step, but now we've been all a 1-step protest process for a while now. Say hail protest, and for team racing and for college team racing, it's one open hand. That open hand, both of those should be the first reasonable opportunity, which is usually pretty damned immediately. It's not hard to do these two things, and there's almost no reason why you wouldn't. Sometimes everybody's hands are involved in doing something on the main sheet, and you might give them a little bit of a break on the open hand. But there's no first reasonable opportunity is what the rule says. And reasonable isn't absolutely as soon as possible, but it should be pretty soon right after that, as soon as you're thinking reasonable. As umpires, hopefully we've all done our umpire speak and we're awesome. And it's even before they hail protest, we know who's getting a penalty, if anybody is. And that's really exciting. But when it's going to be, when we got to give the boats a chance to deal with themselves. We got to give them a chance to turn or give them a chance to say, I'm spinning. They're not required to put a hand up, but that's what we encourage. Put your hand up, say spinning. Sometimes they'll even do this. So they will let you know that they're going to do it. We want to give them the time to do it, usually 3 to 5 seconds. And you've got to be careful if a boat's in the middle of a pack, they can't just turn right away. So it might take them a little while. Hopefully they'll say spinning. So the more complicated the situation, the more I'll be a little bit lenient on giving the boats a chance.
I want to interject here, Sandy, that the issue particularly occurs when we think it's green. We've already made a decision probably before the protest was heard, and we're anxious to get on to the rest of the race. There's a natural tendency to just green it. And we shouldn't. We should wait and see if one of the boats decides that it wasn't green and spins.
Right. And if nobody takes a penalty or clearly indicates to do so, then we signal our red or our green. And one of the things we should do in this 3 to 5 seconds while we're waiting is consider exoneration. So if a boat breaks a rule or both boats break a rule, does exoneration get involved there? And take a note of, hopefully we've got a note of it all the way through. What are the winning pairs? What are the winning combinations? And are we in a situation there might be an advantage gain despite a penalty? So that's a good thing to go over in that 3 to 5 seconds while we're letting them sort it out. We have a tendency to do the green flag and just kind of go toot, toot. Every flag we do, we want to hold high and we want a nice, loud, long whistle. The sailors are doing other things. So they want to be able to look at it. And I like to say, the coach is going to want to know what this is. The coach may be ashore. They may be on a boat some distance off the course. I like to try to encourage us to hold that whistle high, loud, and proud. Ditto when we do a red flag. Up, blow the whistle, point it at the sailor, and hail their number loud. Okay.
Looks like we have a hand up with a question.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Katie. Cody.
Yeah, it's Amanda. I will just say, as a competitor, sometimes when you hear the short whistle, which happens a lot, it's like, oh, it's green, like without even looking at it, like, shh. So I'm just saying from like a competitor standpoint, sometimes you're like short whistle typically means green, long whistle typically means red. Always you have to look, of course.
Okay, it's an interesting thought. Rob, do you do it differently on purpose?
I don't do it at all. My greens are just as long as my reds, and I'm in the same school with you, Sandy. I want it to be up there because I want the TV, the helicopter. They've got to be able to see this, otherwise the folks back home, they'll never know.
All right, ready for the next slide. All right, when the boat takes a voluntary penalty, I thought we were cutting this one. Well, we'll go through it quickly. All right, so decisions are green and white flag means no penalty, also means the incident is closed. Penalize one or more boat. We've already kind of gone through this. The rule allows us, when we do a red flag, to signal a different number of turns. We've gotten away from that in practice. It used to be you'd see quite a bit. You might see a minor breach of 42. You'd spin them once instead of twice. Almost every event I've been at the last 4 or 5 years, we've all said enough of that. It's easier for everybody. When the umpire flies a red flag, the sailors know they got to do 2 turns. If we want them to do more than 2 turns, we will penalize them again. If something goes wacko and the boats don't do it, and we're going to come back to the black and white flag, report that incident protest committee, and it leaves the option for hearing after the water.
Sandy, I'd like to interrupt again, about having the flags available.
That's coming. I think that was coming.
You're gonna have more on this? Okay,
I think so.
go ahead.
Oh, that's right at the top. I'm sorry. Go back. Sorry, Alice.
Yeah.
It's at the top. The
On that first
non-driving
line
flag.
about having the flags available, what available means to me is that they're not in the bottom of the boat. Because you do not want to be looking down at the bottom of the boat when that next incident happens while you're fishing up the flag for the first incident. And basically having to reach down to the bottom of the boat takes one umpire out of all the action for a couple seconds, and that's just way too long. I hold my flags in my hands. I hold my green and white flag in my right hand and my red flag in my left hand. That way I'm never at risk of raising the wrong flag because it's port and starboard. And if you don't want to have them in your hands, another feature that I've seen a lot of umpires do, and I think you do, Sandy, is to keep them in your life jacket.
Yep, like an arrow.
Just right behind your back, you cross them, and the one you pull up with your right hand could be the green, and the one with the left hand could be red, so you always get the right flag, or in front, either way. But have them on your person somewhere, or right where your hand just reaches naturally to get them. In some ribs, you can stick them between the rib, between the tube and the boat, and it's right there. You reach down and grab it, but don't put them in the bottom of the boat.
Yeah, be able to grab the flag without taking your eyes off the action.
Right, exactly. That's what I meant.
Could I add one thing? If you don't have your flag committed to each to hand, as one to each hand, as you described, Rob, look at your hand before you put the flag up, just for a second, so you don't put the wrong one up.
Show it to the other umpire.
That works too.
Okay, now we can move on. All right, on water protests, they are invalid when the hail doesn't include the word protest. When you look and can't see an open hand, so that means it's not conspicuously displayed. When it's not at the first reasonable opportunity, it's got to be, the protest has to be by a boat involved in the incident. So if there's an incident between first and second place and fourth place yells protest, protest, he didn't keep clear, that is green flag automatically because it's invalid. The one exception to that is when 2 teammates have contact, then a boat on the other team can protest. Usually we'll ignore an invalid protest. It just no signal at all. But if the sailors keep looking at you and are clearly expecting some sort of umpire action, then display the green and white flag, and that just says incident closed.
Hey, Sandy, I got a quick question here. If you see 2 competitors on the same team smash into each other really loud, really clearly, right in front of you, and the other team doesn't say the word protest, may you initiate a flag action against one or both of those boats?
Assuming they don't do a penalty turn themselves, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and Franny, that's not restricted to just any contact. And we frequently see contact between the leach of a boat and the rig of the other boat that the competitors themselves don't see.
Yeah.
If that's okay, we call it anyway.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, when there's more than one boat that breaks a rule, if say both boats break a rule, neither one is exonerated and nobody takes penalty, we have the ability to penalize both boats. And so the classic case is leeward on an overlap, leeward is restricted to their proper course. they luff up, and windward, instead of responding to the luff, just simply yells, you're limited, and doesn't keep clear. If windward can keep clear when leeward luffs, windward must keep clear whether or not leeward has the right to luff. So that's sort of a classic case, and you penalize both boats. The other another couple cases where you might find it is two separate incidents, which should have two separate protest sails, but pretty close in time. And the third incident would be boat A breaks a rule, B breaks a rule. To more general of the Rule 17, Rule 11 issue, but B is not compelled to break a rule by A's breaking a rule. So those are cases where you've got to keep an eye out, and you might penalize both boats. If you think both boats broke a rule and only one boat spins and there's a protest, you can spin the other boat. All right. So in this, our leeward luff, windward. So leeward luffs, he's restricted. Windward doesn't keep clear and yells protest, you're not. And leeward spins one circle, you can still spin windward. All right. So we have some leeway there. What you don't do, and there's been talk about changing the rule, but the rule doesn't say it right now, is if two boats have an incident, you think boat A broke a rule, boat B spins voluntarily, we're done. All right. So the only time you spin the boat that didn't turn is if you think they both broke a rule. All right. Exoneration has been moved in the rule book, and it's a concept that's been growing in the rules for the last 8 or 10 years. You young whippersnappers in college probably don't remember when it wasn't part of the rule book, and it was done in different language, but it's a bit more of a mental change now. And we used to turn rules off. Now we exonerate you. So when a boat is compelled to break a rule as a consequence of another boat breaking a rule, they're exonerated for that breach. If they're sailing within mark room or room, either one, say boat B breaks a rule on boat E, E has permission to break while they get exonerated if they break 10, 11, 12, 13, the basic right-of-way rules, or acquiring right-of-way, or Rule 16, or 31. So we just got to think about that sort of thing. They're sailing within their mark room. If they're not sailing within their mark room, that exoneration may not apply. The classic case there would be windward goes in wide, say at Mark 3, windward goes into leeward, and they're wider than they need to be for their giveaway boat. They're entitled to room to go in there, but they're not entitled to go way down. And if they don't keep clear, then they may be entitled to that mark room, but they're not exonerated for breaking 11 because they're not within their mark room. Right-of-way boat or boat sailing with room, they also get exonerated for breaking Rule 14. They're right-of-way if the contact doesn't involve damage or injury. So that's just taking that clause out of 14 that used to be there and sticking under exoneration. The exonerated boat doesn't need to take a penalty, and we should not be penalizing them. So that's exoneration in a nutshell. One nuance that is made clear in the rules, case 146 out of World Sailing, and I'm going to paraphrase it, what's on the screen here. So it's not all that uncommon, say a boat tacks and doesn't give a boat quite enough time to just keep clear. So very briefly, say I tack and I just went into a right-of-way position and I'm about to break 15 because I didn't give the other boat room to keep clear, got time, room to adjust. I, as the new boat, can alter my own course and thereby give them the room. Does that make sense? Okay, that is allowed, and it's case 146. The incident in 146 that talks about it is a pair of boats coming into the signal boat, and initially yellow is keeping clear and has room and has the space. They have waterway to get there, and then when they get overlapped and can't bail, then blue tries to luff them into the committee boat. All right, so blue's about to break 16 because yellow cannot bail, and then blue says, "Oh, my bad," and bears away before there's contact. So thereby giving yellow the room. So yellow doesn't end up breaking 15 or breaking 11, or they're exonerated. Does that make sense? All right. So we have a few questions that go into this. This is like, I wish we umpires were always perfect, but we're not always. So after signaling a decision, can the umpires change their decision? Yeah, how many people are shaking their head? And the answer is, it's best practice not to. Interestingly, the rules don't prevent it, but we really say don't do it. If you signal, especially if you signal green, don't say, oh my, we should have signaled red, as a decision change. Make up your mind, signal it once. Don't do it. And if you're second guessing it, the odds are pretty good. Once you get a little experience, you will find that your changed mind isn't any better or more reliable than your original decision. So have a quick conversation, trust your gut, and don't change. Next question, which is a variant on it, I think. So after we have signaled no penalty, if we make a no, so we decide it's going to be green and we accidentally pull out the red flag, can we correct that decision? Give you guys a little chance to think about it. I won't put you on the spot. All right, Alice, the answer is no. Once we signaled a penalty, we're done. There's no way to untake a penalty, to unsignal a penalty. Once you've signaled it, they've got to take it, and we're done. Is there another bullet on this one? Nope. If we penalize the wrong boat, so we decide that we're going to penalize pink and we penalize blue instead, what can we do? This answer surprised me, but I looked in the rules. Penalize the correct boat. As soon as you can't unpenalize the wrong boat. So the wrong boat's got to spin, but you can at least take some of the problem out of, some of the fairness out of your error by signaling the other team. I did not know I could do that when I was reading this.
Sandy, I think this might be where you were going with asking if there was more on the last slide. If you've signaled green, or you've decided green, and then you put up a flag and penalize, wouldn't the fairest thing be to spin the other boat as well?
But they haven't broken a rule. So there's the odd part about these is you don't always get back to the fairest thing. The best answer is don't mess up your signals. I have flagged the wrong boat before. I didn't even realize it until later. And the answer there is we explain after the race and we apologize. There's quite often we can't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. We should keep our processes, but I certainly have screwed it up. Rob, have you screwed it up?
Of course.
So my most embarrassing was actually in a match race when I thought I had the green flag in my hand and I penalized the team 6 times before we finally realized that those successive greens were not green. They still talk about that one.
I do want to interject one thing. It's not impossible. It actually happens fairly often that with 2 umpire boats that you get 2 different signals out of the 2 different umpire boats on the same incident.
Yep.
In that case, the red flag prevails.
Queuing up the next slide.
Ah.
Okay. So if a racing boat sees green and white and then sees a penalty, can they ignore the penalty? And the answer is no. When you've been penalized, you take the penalty. One thing that, especially when it's blowing hard, it's not uncommon for the sailors to not see it or to not realize it's them. And normally what I will do is I will wait a little bit till I'm sure they're not taking the penalty, and then I will flag them again. Doesn't mean they will sink a penalty. It just makes damn sure that they've seen it. Another thing I do, and this I tell people with fleet racing in Rule 42, if the competitors don't know and they say who, or actually one of them looks at you and says me, instead of saying yes, because 3 other people might be looking at you saying me as well, I just rehail the number. All right, so that makes it very bloody clear.
If you penalize a boat and she doesn't spin, but she's headed the other way, so there's no way to get through the fleet and be near enough to her to call her. And if the other umpire boat is much closer, simply get on the radio and say to the other umpire, please penalize boat number 15.
Right. And sometimes that happens that even if you haven't penalized, I mean, you just, they just split the wrong way. And the easiest way, rather than you go zoom, zoom through the fleet, is to get the other umpire to do it. Once you're certain the sailors have seen the flag, and if they haven't taken a penalty, then it goes to a black and white and it's a hearing after the race, because that's a fair sailing issue. All right. And then this next one, I think, is the one, there we go. This is the one Rob was talking about. So if you got multiple umpire boats and there's an incident and one umpire signals green, may the other umpire still penalize? And the answer is yes. Best practice is for us to have good communication and have one answer for one flag, but we see it from different perspectives. So one umpire may have no facts to justify a penalty. The other umpire may well have seen something different.
And I should say this is a place where it's really fair. The green could be for any number of reasons, including they didn't see the incident.
Yeah. And you guys are all familiar with the, usually if you look at the other, I mean, Rob will get on the radio. I, as often as not, will look at the other umpire and you kind of point. Actually, what I will do is I'll say, I have the call. Contact, hand on the head. So we can do some of that when we're close to each other. If we're not that close or it's not helping, then up on the radio you go.
Sandy, I think you were saying that if you see that they have seen your call and they don't do the penalty, you would take it to a black and white, not give them another penalty. Because the rule, I think, allows either.
Yeah. I think the problem is if they haven't taken a penalty already, why are they going to take one the next time you signal it? So if once I've signaled it, I'm absolutely certain they know they've been penalized and they don't spin. I mean, penalizing them again won't help. Now they owe 4 turns potentially instead of 2, but they're not taking the 2.
And that's sorry.
Go ahead, Andrew.
I was gonna say, and that's where I guess I get confused between that and signaling them the penalty a second time when you're not sure whether they've seen it, because if they did see it, they now might think they owe 4.
Yeah, and it's a little bit of a judgment call on the situation. Usually, I can usually tell if they haven't seen it. You know, when they look at you, you made good eye contact. When it's just this pile of situations and they're all looking at you saying, who's supposed to take a penalty? Then you can rehail.
Okay.
So I personally am very reluctant to conclude that a competitor is deliberately avoiding taking a penalty when I've signaled it. Right. I don't recall that having happened in team racing. It may have happened to me once a long time ago, but not recently. And it certainly never happens in college where the teams are coached and they know better. So I think it's reasonable. In my opinion, I always assume they didn't hear it. And then go over and make sure they know that they're supposed to be taking a penalty. If they hear me and I go over and I say, you got to take a penalty, and they say, no, I'm not going to take your darn penalty or whatever. Well, that's a sportsmanship issue that should be taken to shore.
Yeah. So,
and by the way, as I said before, if you can handle sportsmanship issues that are very, very marginal, the best way to do it is talk to their coach.
I have a question, Sandy.
mm-hmm.
Up to now, in my notes, I sort of have the idea that each umpire boat is acting somewhat autonomously. There are times when you trade boats and you're signaling with the other umpires where to go. But in this last example, where you were talking about 2 different umpire boats, in effect, simultaneously acting autonomously and making a call, you say, get on the radio before making the call. And it's hard for me to know when that switch should be on or off, use the radio. And the answer might be use common sense, but I just would be interested in what you might have to say about that.
Well, I think there's times when it's really clear. When you got your umpire split left and right, and there's an incident on the right, then absolutely that umpire has it. The places I find can be tricky is Mark III, when I call it the fur ball happens, and they're all you got 4 of the 6 boats in the zone at the same time, all jibing and attacking each other. And then out of it all comes a flag. And both umpires are in different positions to see it. and it's not clear who's got the best angle to make the call. That's when I would do it. So a lot of it's common sense.
So I'll contribute again. I like, if I'm the umpire and I think the other umpire boat has the call, but I think I saw something, I try to communicate just the information. Contact 15-2. And let them use that as part of their decision process, rather than making the call for them. But we do get situations where somebody, there's a protest and nobody responds to it. And the two umpire boats get on the radio. Somebody says, I see a protest from 15. Did you see that? And the other boat says, yeah, we got it. Or the other boat says, no, we didn't see it, but we'll green it.
Thank you.
And then along those lines also, it's D 2.3 subletter F is the one that umpire initiated, is when a boat fails to take a penalty signaled by the umpire. And I think that's a bit where Andrew was getting at. Would you
Right.
signal them a second penalty? I wouldn't use F to signal them a penalty when they haven't done anything, and I'm sure they've seen it.
Right.
I would do that. They do an invalid penalty. They do one turn instead of two, or there's something wrong with the penalty they've tried to take. So then they get an extra hit, and we are coming to that now. So Alice, take it away. All right, taking penalty turns is largely the same. It's still Rule 44.2, so it's the same as it is in fleet racing. And the same for if you're doing Rule 42 in a fleet race, but it's the same rule that they go to, 44.2. The umpires are going to monitor the penalty turns, and the key there is to get well clear as soon after the incident as possible. So their obligation that has as soon as possible on it, which is very high urgency, is the requirement to get well clear. All right. Sometimes it takes them a little while to get well clear. And that's where hopefully they'll say spinning, or you'll see them trying, and just give them a chance to get out of it. The penalty itself starts when they're clearly turning to start the penalty. If they've gotten well clear and they're taking their penalty, and somebody say tacks or makes a course alteration, and now they can no longer complete their penalty without an interruption, they are permitted to make a short interruption. But that presumes they got well clear to begin with. See that happening in match racing when a boy, as I say, we just love to tack at the boat trying to do a penalty and just make their life difficult. Their penalty is done when they complete their last tack or jibe. So all this is normal 44.2 stuff. If they're not keeping clear and they're protested, so they get one of their two turns in and they just make a hash of it and they foul another boat and they are protested, they still owe the original penalty, and they may owe another penalty. So a penalty for not keeping clear while taking a penalty, and that also invalidates the penalty they were taking. So that's when you start getting dizzy. And then, as Rob mentioned, and it's always a good note, is note what tack they are when they start their penalty. And a conversation to be had, if, say, it's an incident that happens right in the middle of a tack, which tack were the boats on? Does a boat think that tack is part of its penalty? So make sure you guys agree on that. Okay. Then we are, all right, umpire initiated penalties. They take two penalties unless we hail something else. And as I said, we almost never do. We penalize umpire initiated for rules 31 and 42, propulsion and touching a mark, contact between boats in different races, advantage taken despite a penalty being taken. And you might well wait until the penalty is completed and take a look at that and say, where are they? If a boat is usually, at the very least, you want to make sure that the penalized boat is behind the boat that they broke a rule on. So if that boat capsizes, you might do what we call get dizzy. Talked about that a little bit last night. Rule 14, when there may well have been damage or injury. Talked about that last night too. When a boat clearly indicates she's going to take a one-turn penalty and she does not, they take a two turns for that. When they fail to take the penalty signaled, or they commit a breach of sportsmanship. So all of those are things in which we initiate. And then coming up on when we do the black flag. So fair sailing, misconduct issues, competitor intimidation, denigrating the race officials, reckless sailing, port sportsmanship. All of those things are fair sailing. We can spin them on the water. We can put it into the protest room afterwards. I would go to black and white flag if the spin doesn't help, or you're thinking you're going possibly beyond in Rule 2 into a misconduct issue. That's when I would not spin them. I would, or maybe you spin them and you do a black flag. Somebody got a question there? And Rule 14, when there is high likelihood of damage or injury, particularly significant, something that's going to require a hearing to sort out, then you go with black flag. The black flag doesn't have to be there for a damage hearing. Sometimes it might be that you weren't sure at the time. You didn't do a black flag and they get ashore and swap boats, and the boatswain ashore says, yo, this boat's taking on water. So then the damage hearing can still happen.
The other side of that is that the black flag allows you to withdraw it if you find that there's no reason.
Absolutely. You cannot pursue it if it isn't needed. In cases except for damage, if you don't fly the black flag, you cannot have a hearing. And then the last one.
So Sandy, the bottom line here is if you have any question whether you should be flying a black and white flag, put it up and blow your whistle.
Yeah.
It causes nothing. It causes no damage, no harm to the race itself in progress. It doesn't have any impact on that. And it enables you to have a hearing later on if there's a problem.
Right. And then the last one, which was advantage can't be undone by penalty turns.
Right. And the example of that is a boat sets an illegal mark trap.
Mm-hmm. Her
teammate goes through. She then spins for the illegal mark trap. But her team has gained an advantage that she is not, that we can't solve because we'd never spin the boat that didn't break a rule.
Right. Okay.
We have a question in the chat.
Okay.
In an incident between boats racing in different races, does there need to be a hail of protest?
Go ahead, Rob, explain that.
That's an umpire initiated protest. We had it on the slide earlier, right?
Isn't it contact between boats in different races?
Right.
Yes.
When we say something is umpire initiated protest, that means we do it in the absence of a protest.
Right. But I think
so if it's on the slide that says that teammate contact or contact between boats in different races is umpire initiated, that means there need be no protest for us to do it.
If there's contact, right? If it's just a
Contact between
right of
teammates
way
or
into without
contact
contact,
in
then yes,
races.
it needs to be a valid protest.
Yeah.
And they're pretty unusual. No, the boats don't tend to want to protest each other when they, and it's not uncommon for two matches to go through each other, and they tend to work it out. All right, other race hearings, and this is all we're going to talk about for other race hearings. College Pacific, there you can have a protest for rules other than Part 2, 31, and 42. So other than things they can protest on the water for, then they could fly a protest. Redress supplied boats, which is almost always a case in college sailing. Then Appendix D of the rule book and the college sailing in the US, college sailing procedural regs have a whole appendix on how to deal with damage hearings. And the main thing we can do on the water, if there's damage or breakdown, Appendix E deals with breakdown hearings. Sorry, I'm getting my words mixed up. It's the best thing we can do is note the positions of the boats, make notes on what efforts the boats make to fix their problem with breakdown and how that subsequently impacts a race. Redress can be boat requested for regular Rule 62 stuff, except not for supplied boat breakdown, nor damage by their own teammates, or basically anything we umpires do or don't do. We are pretty close to God under the rules, as far as redress goes. The one place we can do is we can initiate redress if there's an umpire initiated, say there's significant interference by an official boat, and it says official boat. So race committee, organizing authority provided coach or spectator boats or our own umpire boats. We can do those redresses ourselves. My suggestion would be if something happens fairly early in a race and the umpires have had a significant interference in it, then the easier thing to do might be just to get on the race committee and ask them just to abandon the race and resale it right there. All right, and that's it. We're not going to go into all that. If for those of you who are new to team race umpiring and are worried about all this stuff, the real answer is talk to your chief umpire, and they'll sort out this stuff afterwards. So we were not going to spend a lot of time going over how to do all those hearings.
So the bottom line on the water is if you feel you've interfered, that your boat has interfered with the race, usually that's because a competitor ran into you, then if you think that you may have interfered, fly the black flag right away, blow your whistle, and get on the radio to the chief umpire, to the head umpire in your race, or talk to him right afterward and say, look, we had an incident, we may have interfered, and he's going to say, or she's going to say something like, well, did you interfere? Do you think you might have? And if your answer is no, it was a glancing blow, I don't think it had any impact, then probably there's not going to be any further action. If you say, yeah, I think I might have, then we have the option on our own to call a hearing on behalf of the boat that was interfered with. But the boat herself does not have any right to apply for redress on that basis.
Okay, I can do I can expedite the expedited hearing slide. I thought we had that one hidden. But Appendix G for college sailing has expedited hearings, and it's a 1 minute left, 1 minute right. Ask each other questions. We can call witnesses. The protest committee can, but not the parties themselves. And then we huddle. Usually we go to the back of the boat, hang around the engine, make a quick decision, and report it orally. It all happens very quick, very on the water. And the parties to the hearing cannot ask for reopening. So that's the one tricky part. You spend enough time at it to make sure you get it right, because the parties are just stuck with your answer. There's no appeal. There's no reopening. There's really nothing they can do.
There might be an appeal.
Might be. All right, take it away, Rob.
Oh, this is me.
42, you were going to do the 42.
I am. Here it is. It says consistent enforcement of Rule 42 is a critical part of the umpire's job. So here are the categories of Rule 42 that we end up with. Sculling below close haul. That happens at the start. It sometimes happens at a windward mark in light air. Boat just is almost going to get around it and almost going to hit it, and sculls in order to avoid both of those, either failing to go around or hitting the mark. And the worst time we see it, and it happens actually reasonably often, a boat is supposed to do 2 turns. She does her first turn, she tacks, then she jibes, then she tacks. And boy, getting into that last jibe is just dead slow. She's lost all her boat speed. There's no wind. And she tends to then scull her way through that last jibe. And that gets penalized with 2 more turns. When you see, so you'll see a boat, the 2 rocks, what'll happen is you'll see a boat, say they come around the leeward mark, they heel nicely, it facilitates the rotation around the mark, they flatten the boat, thinking they're going to get really good back to full speed right there, and it doesn't happen. They're over trimmed or something else went wrong, they didn't get their weight right. And because they didn't get the result they want, there's a real temptation to step down to the leeward hull and flatten the boat again. And that second bite of the apple is, you should draw a penalty every time. Same thing with breaking an overlap at the zone. You'll see it every once in a while. A boat will be heeled. She'll flatten just as she gets to the zone, but she doesn't break the overlap. So she heels and flattens again. Pumping the mainsail upwind is something that we really should be on the lookout for. There are certain sailors that do it almost habitually. It's a little 2 or 3 inch tug on the main sheet. It just happens over and over and over again. And we once calculated out what we think boats gain around a race course by doing that, and the answer is a lot.
Rob, do you judge that by watching for a leech flick?
I'd love to, except college sails tend to be cut with really tight leeches.
Right.
And so you could see it propel the boat even without the leech flick.
They've gotten really good at holding their hands below their knees.
Yeah, make sure you look
and
down into
just
the boat.
using their wrist. So they're
Make
not
sure you
using
look
their
down into
arm
the
at
boat.
all.
Yep.
And
Okay.
point out that it's the pump itself. It needs to be multiple pumps, but it doesn't need to propel the boat. You don't need to, the clearly propel the boat would apply to that one massive pump.
Right. Multiple pumps are automatically illegal.
Rob, would you
Next.
please discuss the transition from winging to jib reaching?
I think we got a slide on this.
Do you? Oh, cool.
I don't think we do.
I had a whole bunch of slides in here.
Da.
Oh dear. Oh,
Been
okay.
left on the cutting room floor.
All right. Well,
You're
sorry.
gonna have to wing it, Rob.
So, okay, let me go through these more carefully then, right from the top, and I'll get to your question, Franny. Sculling is permitted for a boat above close haul in order to get to close haul. And you'll see this fairly commonly, and it's totally legal. What's not legal is sculling in one direction to get to close haul and then changing and going back to the other close haul course. Once the boat decides to scull to a close haul course, that's the only one they can scull to. It is irrelevant whether the tiller crosses the center line or whether the boat is propelled or whatever. It's just simply allowed. Below close haul, it's again irrelevant as to whether it propels the boat. It's just simply illegal. So that's the issue there. And I mentioned when we tend to see that. On heel and flatten, oh, here it is. This is the other slide.
I know, I'm magic.
Magic. So fanning the mainsail is what I was talking about before. All right. And there's an ICSA guideline on this. It's been published for years and years and years. I think it's written by Matt Knowles, and it's accepted policy on ICSA, but it's not a rule. It's not in the procedure rules. So it has kind of an in-between status, more like sort of U.S. appeals. But here are the standards that we try to apply. First, at the start, a roll to leeward and then flatten must be accompanied by a turn upwind while the boat is heeled to leeward. Because the rules, the basic rule 42, or not basic rule, but rule 42 allows a heel. It allows you to heel the boat in order to facilitate a turn. So that's the only way you get out of the heel and flatten breaking a rule. In college sailing, we assume that an aggressive heel and flatten without turning automatically accelerates the boat. So if we're not in a position to really see the bow wave or to see that boat was accelerated, we just assume that she did. That was the reason why the heel and flatten was done, and we assume it accomplished its purpose. So we flag it. We also don't, in college sailing, try to evaluate whether the amount of turn was commensurate with the amount of heel. It's either there's a turn or there isn't, because we found ourselves unable to actually do that calculation. We're just not good enough to know how much heel results in how much turn. So we don't do it. Everyone here, I hope, knows about the college tack and jibe rule. The rule prohibits the mast moving out of the vertical more than once aggressively. And what that really comes down to is at the end of the tack and jibe, the mast cannot pass vertical aggressively. And that's if the crew member is clearly slamming down the leeward hull to stop the boat to stop the flattening from continuing, then that's not an aggressive. The tip goes just beyond vertical a few inches and back, and that's not a problem. It's when it just swings right through vertical that it's a foul. And finally, a Fran's question, and that is, rocking to unwing or wing or unwing is okay as long as the boat turns when she's heeled. In other words, we regard that just the same way we regard the college roll at the start. And the reason we hate it, we'd love to be able to penalize it. We think it's wrong. We think it's propulsion in the sense of Rule 42, but there's nothing in Rule 42 that allows us to penalize it. You can penalize boats for multiple tacks or multiple jibes if there is no clear tactical reason for doing it, or changing the wind or whatever that would make a boat jibe or tack. In team racing, it's very rare to call that because there's almost always another boat nearby who's also tacking and jibing. And so the tactical motivation is clear. But the one case where you do see it is if you see a boat on a leeward leg in light air, jibe out from underneath on a competitor, out of her wind shadow, and then you see her jibe back into that wind shadow again. That's really hard to justify at all. That's just, and then they jibe out again, say. So that's 3 jibes in a row. We tend to look at 3 as being the minimum. If a boat doesn't do more than 3 jibes or tacks, we're not going to call it as repeated jibes and tacks. But if you see that going into a wind shadow as part of it happening, then that has no clear tactical reason.
What about when you see that with no change in, no turn?
Penalize 2 turns, 2-turn penalty.
And Rob, does it make any difference if the let's say there are 2 boats and they're both tacking back and forth? Does it make any difference if they're teammates?
Oh yeah. No, the common situation where there's clearly a tactical motivation is when that they're on opposite teams.
I understand. I'm just.
So when they're teammates, then probably they're just breaking the rule. Because it's hard to understand why they would both tack repeatedly, alongside of each other or whatever, because normally in team race tactics, one of them would have an assignment and do it. The other would have a different assignment and do that.
Right.
So I'd have to see it, but I don't see that happening. It's a shame about the repeated tacks and jibing for tactical reasons, because that allows, look at a run. Suppose blue is behind red, okay, and is trying to cover, and red jibes to get out from underneath the shadow, and then blue jibes to cover to put the shadow back on. Now red jibes again, and blue jibes again, and red jibes again, and blue jibes again, and guess what? Blue has just accomplished her purpose of unbalancing the other team, because that pair goes down the race course and ends up totally on a different rung from the rest of the boats.
And you're
So-
saying we let that go, even though it's fairly.
We let it go unless it gets really bad. I mean, somebody does 8 or 10 attacks and so on. You see that that's what they did. They completely unbalanced the other team. I think then you can argue that those tacks and jibes were not motivated by immediate tactical reasons with respect to the other boat. They were motivated by just trying to go fast.
The other place you see that happen a lot is when you're getting down into the lower limits of wind, and when kinetics start to really dominate the team race tactical game, that's a time to have a conversation with the race committee about whether you should be racing at all.
certainly is. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I almost never see any of this except we're in the lower limits of the wind range.
Right. Because it doesn't pay otherwise.
Right.
No, the roll at the start pays right up into almost hiking out weather.
Right. I think we're talking about the matching,
the rest of it doesn't.
attacking and jibing duels.
Right.
And for those that do a lot of, if any of you do international stuff, I don't totally agree with the ICSA. I don't totally agree that a lot of these ICA guidelines actually match the existing rule, but they are authoritative guidelines published for college sailing. So it's how the sailors are coached to play the game. And I think we as judges don't need to go take our own strong opinions and change all that on its head. How's that?
So does everybody know what Sandy's referring to is that World Sailing publishes Rule 42 guidance on a number of different classes, especially the Olympic classes. Maybe only thing. Oh no, I know 420s as well. And so if you're going to be officiating at an event that is not college event, in which Rule 42 is called, those guidelines are used, and the sailors expect us to use them. They train to those guidelines and so on. And it's only fair to the sailors for us to use them, even if they don't agree, even if we think they don't agree with Rule 42.
And same thing with these college guidelines. Wait
a minute, Sandy, the same thing is true of the call book, right? If there's a call, if there's a team race call and it applies, then it applies. That's all we do, even if we think the call is wrong.
Right.
And the clear case of the guidelines would be the opties as well, because we see a lot of opti team racing and there's no opti guidelines for Rule 42.
Yes, there you go. Thank you. Right. There's an excellent example. Worth reading.
As things you would never think of in any other fleet.
Indeed.
Your barn door for a rudder.
Okay.
And
Is that
bay
it
ring
for me?
propulsion.
Did I finish my propulsion Rule 42 stuff? Am I done?
You have found all the slides I can find.
Right.
All right. So in the interest of time, we're running a little bit behind. I will quickly give an overview of the call book and a few key principles that it highlights, but strongly recommend taking a read of it yourself. And then we will do a demo of Umpire Speak and then have a little bit of time to do breakouts still before coming back. So just quickly on the call book, as I mentioned at the end of yesterday's session, this is a great way to review and prep for each event. I'm not sure constant companion might be overselling it a tiny bit, but at an event, it should be your constant companion. It's a great way to not only get yourself sort of in that flow of thinking through incidents and putting yourself in the umpire position, but it's also a great way to explain incidents and calls to competitors and use that to sort of explain your opinion. It's also all of the umpire tests. Well, most of the umpire test questions are rooted in things from the call book. So if you're thinking about taking one of the umpire tests, this is your critical study guide, in addition to the umpire manual. The call book, the main thing it does is sort of put everyone on the same page in terms of how incidents will be called. It also, within that context, pulls out some very important principles that apply across incidents. And so we have 2 pages of these. I will not cover every single one of them, but a few that really stuck out to me. This first one, we hear this all the time. There does not need to be contact for a boat to fail to keep clear. That is in response to the "should I have hit him" question that regularly is part of the debrief. The third one is also interesting. When one boat acquires right of way, the other must promptly take appropriate action to keep clear, and the right of way boat must give her room to do so. This top one comes into play an awful lot. So when you acquire right of way and force another boat to break a rule while keeping clear, you've not given that other boat room to keep clear, and therefore you break 15. So giving a boat room to keep clear includes giving them room to not break another rule. The third one is pretty, no, there's another one. The fourth one is pretty similar. So when a right-of-way boat changes course, you have to give any boat affected room to keep clear. So this comes into play a lot at marks, or in the pre-start when you gain an overlap to leeward and alter up. You have to give that boat to windward of you room for any affected boat to windward of them to keep clear as well. And then the fifth one is also important. When a boat is hailed for room to tack, she must act as if that hail is valid, even if she thinks it's not. So this is a safety issue. If you think the hail is invalid, they need to tack and protest and see if the umpires agree with them on the validity of the hail. So those are the key principles of the call book. Before we go to breakout groups, I'm going to switch us over to a video that Rob shared. It looks like it's from the PCCs. We're going to do it without sound, just so you can hear Rob and Sandy in real time, taking the role of the two different umpires. Rob, do you want to play pink? Pink 7, I think, is the boat we'll be following in this. And Sandy, you will follow green. Does that work?
I'm hoping there's another boat in here soon.
You're going to be very bored.
Yeah, because the other umpire has the pink boat that's up ahead. Let's do it.
In the audio for this, you quickly take pink boat 7. They come your way.
Oh, okay.
Right.
I cheated. I've watched it.
All right. 15 leeward right on 7 and windward give on 8.
Agreed.
Now ahead right on 15. Okay.
8 hit the mark.
They're out of the mix. 15, I'm starboard right going away. I think I'm ahead
I'm
right.
7 leeward,
Ahead right.
jibing.
Yep. Port leeward right now. I should have leffing rights on you 7 and 13. I'm
Very good.
starboard.
Starboard
Now
right
on
and
windward
7.
give, taking action. I kept clear.
I'm
And
clear astern of 15.
Do you have leffing rights?
No.
Okay.
And I'm
Oh, now
clear
you're
stern.
clear stern. Doesn't matter. Okay. So I'm ahead right, head right. Leeward
Clear
coming
stern.
in
Stern give.
from the right, whatever boat number I am, and I'm leeward. I'm holding my
I got a
course,
boat to leeward of
my
me.
course,
Windward, keep clear. I
and
protest.
came
That's
from way far away. So I
that
have.
protest is all green for me.
I agree. Green. Okay. So 15, I'm clear ahead. I'm on starboard, and then
I'm jibing.
port give.
Port give.
14, I'm starboard right.
jibing. Whoa.
Clear, and then
Okay.
yeah, what was that, boss?
I broke rule. I windward leeward with respect to
it's 7,
15, or if I jibed, I was breaking rule 15.
Yep.
So
I agree.
it's all on me.
All on you.
Penalized 7.
Ooh. So how do we do, guys?
I mean, obviously with your experience, you did really well. I sometimes lost track of which boat some of you were calling.
And that
You
is,
jumped boats without,
and you heard me emphasize
Without
earlier, I
numbering the boat.
number the boats. Rob tends to, I was looking for other video that we could do, and Rob tends to identify the boat afterwards. He'll say, I'm leeward right on 17.
Right.
And that usually for Rob, that means he is 17, not leeward right on the other boat. I tend to say I'm 17 leeward right.
And you're
yeah,
right. You're doing it correctly and I'm not.
yeah, because when I heard Rob and I wasn't following it, now that makes sense. I thought you were some other boat and you were leeward right of 17 when you said that.
What I should say is I was 7 the whole time, so I didn't repeat it. So then I say I'm windward boat with respect to 15 or leeward boat with respect to 14 or whatever.
I thought you jumped on 8 occasionally. That's why I got confused.
8 poked their nose in and then went away
Yeah.
on that incident.
8 hit the mark, thank goodness. Otherwise, we'd have to watch Heritage.
Right.
I'd
Any
love
other-
to use some commentary.
Yeah. Any other reactions to?
A couple other umpire speak suggestions, unless somebody has a reaction. I don't see any. something that Steve Shupak out of California will do is he will occasionally just look. So if he's not the driving boat, so he's got like every boat on green, he'll just go leeward, windward, leeward. And you can just see him. And when you're working with him, you see him point at the boat. So it helps lay out the whole fleet. And in the pre-start, we're quite often calling multiple boats, and I'll do the same thing. I'm right, give. Or I'll just dismiss boats, say no collision course, nobody to play with, or some phrases you can use to help sort all that out. Downwind, it helps a lot to continually think who's on what tack. It's really easy to see two boats going the same way, going both dead downwind, and forget that the trailing boat, which you think naturally is give way, is starboard and the lead boat's port. A very easy thing to screw up. So just constantly think, what tack are they on? Are they overlapped?
Let me jump in and stress that again. So we got two of the leaders in this group. That is, it's so critical. The first thing in deciding anything about what rules are going on is to know which tack boats are on, of course, and especially leeward. Going to leeward, boats jibe repeatedly, especially in college, and especially 470s and 420s and FJs. And it's really critical to track that in the umpire speak, even if that's the only thing. I think a couple times here, it's the only thing that Sandy and I were able to get in the period of time it took for the situation to change. But you got to get that one right.
Oh, and my last point on umpire speak is keep it up all the time. I went through a bunch of video from last year's Hinman, including Rob and I, we umpired the finals. And there were several times when our umpire speak was pretty atrocious. We weren't talking as much. We were watching the action. We'd end up with extra words in there, and then the shit hits the fan and suddenly we're behind. So keep it up all the time. And that was looking at all those videos reminded me I need to be much more diligent on that.
When you stop doing umpire speak, it's really tough to start again. So it's worth it to keep talking, even if you reiterate things you just said, because that keeps your keeps your mouth going. I guess it helps because you stop and and now you're watching and that's it.
Okay, we're losing the audience.
Yep.
All right, let's
we're going to do a breakout, right?
Some action. Okay, so I think this is reasonably close to the folks that are still on this call, though we've had some departures and additions over time. So if it doesn't automatically take you to a breakout room, I will hang back for a minute and see, but you should all go to a breakout room automatically. And then we'll come.
And we both got to about the same place yesterday, right?
Yep, I put the slides in starting with where we sort of all left off yesterday.
Okay.
So you should be able to go to those. And
how do I advance slides?
How do you advance slides? Just on your own. We can all three be sharing the same slides and it won't advance each other's slides.
Ah, really?
So just share your screen within your breakout and then
Yep.
pick which incident you want to go to. And then let's come back and let's say about 15 minutes. So this will be a lightning round, but we'll do what we can. All right, while we're waiting for everyone to come back, any reactions, questions? Need more practice?
It would be great in this, as you revise the course constantly to indicate where a protest hail might take place in the sequence.
Yep. And I'll just make another plug for Patrick's weekly team racing practice. To get in the swing of this.
Mostly match racing right now.
It's mostly match racing, but team. So you'll have to learn a few new rules, but the procedure is the same. The umpire speak, the practice is the same.
And there's Rob.
Yeah, with my camera not working again.
Yep.
Max headroom one more time.
Yeah, it's getting more interesting, Rob.
Should have everyone back here by now. Yep. So Rob, I think the one thing we wanted to cover in these last couple of minutes is, well, two things. A, if anyone has any questions, happy to answer them. And I can stay back if needed. And B, Rob, you want to talk a little bit about next steps in terms of certification?
No, I don't.
Oh, he was going to give that to me.
Oh,
Sandy wants to talk about.
And I
better.
completely forgot about it.
So the answer is we don't know.
I understand, though, that a test is available for people who took this course. Is Amanda here or Al?
Yeah, I'm here.
So had you made arrangements for the umpires test to be available for attendees of this?
I think it will be available after the in-person one on the 25th.
Okay. And to anybody who took this one or the in-person?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. So if you'd like to take the test, the test would give you, there's a testing requirement to be certified. In the US, we do 2 levels of umpiring. We have a regional umpire and we have a national umpire. There's a testing requirement. There's a training requirement. I'm not sure. I think this course should qualify you for the regional as far as workshops go, as the training part of it. There's also some on-water assessment. So you got to work a certain number of events and get assessed by an umpire who's an assessor. And we usually have an assessor at most. Well, if you want to get an assessment, if you'd like to pursue getting certified, send me or Alice or Amanda an email, any one of us, and we'll work it forward. And the trick is we've got a limited number of people who can assess whether umpires who are assessors, and they assess your umpiring on the water. And you have to have a certain number of those to get certified and a certain amount of experience. We don't always have umpire assessors at every college team race event. But if you want to do it, just work with us and we'll see if we can't get an assessor there. And otherwise, our umpires committee has not been very proactive of late at the U.S. Sailing, and I'm race administration chair at U.S. Sailing now, which means that committee reports to me, and I'm going to be working on correcting that over the coming weeks.
Sandy, will there be assessments going on at our in-person training on the water in the end of February?
Amanda?
No, there's no on the water component to that. It's just all classroom, very similar to this. And people who are on the Zoom and obviously can't get to Bristol, I think we'll have a virtual option to, like it's a proctored thing, the exam. So you just, I think we can make it work with Zooming in. And I will make sure I get some more clarification on that.
2 questions. Is there a practice test that we can take on our own to see where we have to bone up a bit? And second question, of course, how do we raise our hand and say, I'm happy to umpire your event, but all I've been to is this class, caveat emptor? How does that work?
Part of the reason we're doing this class is because we need umpires at virtually every college team race this spring, whether it's NISA, Mesa, out west. We've added a bunch of women's team race events, women's only team race events, and that's in addition to the regular college load. So we are hungry for umpires. So if you let Amanda know, whoever you let know, we'll pass this email list of people who've taken this course, and you will probably be invited to a number of events. So that's that part of, in terms of getting work, it's just letting people know you're interested. And Amanda and Alice and Rob and I can all help with that. And the rest of these certifications, since I completely forgot about that question, I will have to check as to how all that works. But if you go to the U.S. Sailing website, just Google U.S. Sailing umpires program.
I just put it in the chat there. And you can see, you scroll down, you can see the certification steps to be a national umpire, and then scroll down and you can see a slightly different set of requirements to be a regional umpire.
Okay. And Zach is pointing out that he's doing a shameless plug for umpires at SUNY Maritime. So get out your, Rob talked a little bit about attire. I got back into skiing last winter after 25 years away from it, and discovered that modern ski jackets and modern ski pants are all Gore-Tex, and they are awesome for umpiring. I was a warm umpire for the first time in 15, 20 years of college team racing.
Glad to hear. One other avenue, I don't recall exactly if there's a separate form or once you pass one of the umpire tests, you can get into the U.S. sailing system as a UIT umpiring training that anyone who refers to the U.S. sailing website, Find a Race official thing, can find your contact info that way as well.
U.S. sailing website is not always the most user friendly.
But you can, the
I know,
find an
but it's
umpire
another
page
avenue.
is easy. Just put down find a race official in Google and it'll come up. US
Yeah.
sailing, find a race official.
I
And then
recommend-
just scroll down the pages. They scroll for a way.
I recommend Googling anything you want to find on U.S. sailing's website.
All I can say is it's
Or
better
World
than the World Sailing site. No,
Not a
Googling
lot.
the World Sailing site doesn't work anymore either. It gives
No,
you
it
links to
doesn't.
the old
Nothing
site.
works.
Oh, true. Well, anyway, I digress.
Google
Nothing
still
works.
thinks the old site is there.
Yeah,
Parts of World Sailing still think the old site is there.
Right.
I found many links have not been updated.
If
Okay.
you're not careful, you can end up with the old documents. Yeah.
Just
Well,
a
folks-
clarification on the assessment. So it says you have to be a regionally certified umpire, you need 3 assessments from 2 different events. No.
yes.
At least 2.
Is it possible to use events that you've already done?
No,
Like getting-
Only if you got the assessment at it.
The umpire has to ride along with you and determine, talk about what kind of a job you do. And he has to know in advance that he's doing that in that capacity. So just sharing an umpire boat with an umpire would not do.
Are there any opportunities for like, at MIT Thursday night, pick up team racing or anything like that to get a little experience?
We have team racing every Thursday night from May through the end of August. But we also have, since now the spring season is all team racing, it's all team racing every day of the week at MIT. So there is never a problem getting out on the water and watching team races and seeing what's happening. Plus, we generally host a regatta every weekend of the spring season in team racing. So there's lots of opportunity to get down to MIT and get out on the water, and we have plenty of boats.
Fran, are you umpiring the weekday races, or are you just going down just to watch?
No, that's just practice on weekdays. And the racing in the summer is just racing, and it's not umpired, but you'd be welcome to go right out there and watch it. I mean, it truly is often the best of the best who are out there playing. So it's lots of exciting moves.
Okay, well, that wrap it up, I think. Thank you, everybody. I hope this was both kept your attention going and also taught a mess about umpiring. Clearly, there's more than we can cover in a two hours, 2.5 hour seminars, but I think we covered most of the main points, and I think thank you, fellow leaders, for this as well. And I think we're done.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks again,
You're welcome.
To-
Thank you, guys.
Sandy, Alice, and Rob, for your infinite umpire wisdom, and everybody else, thanks for your time.
Good night.
Thank you, guys.
All right,
It was awesome.
guys.
Thanks a lot,
You're
guys.
welcome. Thank you.
Amanda, I have a question.
guys.
Thank you.
The session at the end of February, will that be essentially a repeat of this, or is that further to this?
No, it's, I think they're gonna use the same, essentially the same slide deck, maybe modifications. It's meant to be,
Peter Wilson teaching it.
yeah, Peter and Steve.
It will be
It's meant to be
largely
the
the
same.
same materials. Yeah.
Yeah, that's Stephen. For those who don't know, that's Stephen Wolf, who's an international umpire and contributed a lot of the material that's already in this slideshow.
Okay, thank you.
Right.